Welcome to the Win, Make, Give podcast. Today's a special day. Today's a day that we think about and celebrate freedom. No matter what day you're listening to this is the word of the day. Now, I'm joined here today with Chad Himes and Bob Stewart. You guys want to say anything smart?
I got nothing. I'm excited about freedom.
Take off, eh?
We have a Canadian and an American in here, and we are celebrating independence. We are celebrating freedom
From the British.
Yay.
From the British.
and the Canadians,
Wait a minute.
and the Canadians from the Americans.
No,
And-
they became independent from the British as well, I think.
They did. In fact, many countries actually celebrate Independence Day, not all on the same day, but Bolivia, August 6th, Cambodia, November 9th, United States, July 4th, which we'll talk about in a second, India, August 15th, Norway, May 17th, Mexico, September 16th, Australia, January 26th, Costa Rica, September 15th, South Korea, March 1st, and August 15th. They have
Wait a
twice.
minute.
That's awesome. France, July 14th. It looks to me like July is a month to think about freedom. So that's what we're talking about in the month of July. Because today, as we're recording this, is what day in Canada, Chad?
It's Canada Day, eh? July 1st.
And what does that mean?
Well, that is the day that Canada got its independence from Britain.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you remember what year?
1867, if my Canadian history is still working from when I went to school.
And Chad, where were you raised as a child?
Toronto.
Toronto.
Yes.
So for all of our Canadian listeners, you are well represented today and always. We are 1/3 Canadian in this room, but I live about 20 miles from the Canadian border, so I'm almost Canadian.
I went
That's
to
true.
high school on the Canadian border, so I'm a 10th Canadian or something.
And Bellingham is farther north than Toronto, actually. So I actually grew up farther south than you.
No kidding.
Yep.
No kidding. Well, let's talk a little bit about independence. Coming up will be a holiday in the United States, July 4th, Independence Day. Most commonly known as the day the Declaration of Independence got put into action.
It's interesting the way you say it like that, Ben. Put into action. Why do you
Yeah.
say it that way?
Well, what's interesting is it was actually drafted on July 2nd, right? Presented and approved on July 4th. But it wasn't until, was it weeks or a month later?
month later.
That it was actually signed as the document as we know it. So we're a little bit of a history lesson today as we go back into the Declaration of Independence. What did it say? It said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal." They meant women as well, ladies and gentlemen.
I mean, at that time they didn't, if we want to get
That's
technical
true.
about it.
Yeah, but we do now.
We do now.
Everybody equal. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal and that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Which was an excellent movie.
Thank you for taking us off task once again, Chad Himes. Among these, ladies and gentlemen, are the pursuit of our rights, which include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Better known, this document gave the finger to Britain when they said that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free independent states, that they are absolved from the allegiance to the British crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as a free and independent states, that they have the full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. That was the Declaration of Independence, ladies and gentlemen. Greatly summarized down to a couple of sentences. What say you, Canadian Chad?
I say they talk funny. they talk funny back then.
They did. They did talk a little silly. Now, as we said, most of you probably know, or now know that the Declaration of Independence was not signed on July 4th. It was just the day that the document was actually formally dated, finalized, and adopted by the Congress, which, ironically, they formally voted in 2 days prior. John Hancock and Charles Thompson signed an early printed copy of the Declaration, which was given.
About how many people have signed the Declaration? How many signers were there? 54 or something like that?
54.
Yes.
The only one, you know Thomas Jefferson, right? You know a few of these,
one.
but like
Everybody
John
knows
Hancock is the
that's
guy, right? He's got the massive signature on there. It's like, that's become like, put your John Hancock on this. Like, could that guy have pulled off like any greater feat in history
than being the guy with the big signature
Yeah,
on
like
the Declaration?
Charles Thompson, who also signed it that day. Has anybody heard of that guy?
No, nobody. John definitely got it. First to sign your John Hancock on the bottom. Everybody else didn't sign until August 2nd, with others even following later. But Mr. Hancock returned once again to sign on the most updated version.
They didn't have e-signatures back then.
He was very proud of his signature.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness. What's interesting as we do our research about the 4th of July,
Yeah, this was interesting, Ben.
Thomas Jefferson and John Adams died on July 4th, and one other president, Chad Himes.
Oh gosh, you're gonna put me on the spot. What other president died? I don't know. I'm from
Monroe.
Canada.
James Monroe,
Yeah.
the nation's 5th president.
Man, that was a day, right? Like our 2nd, 4th, and 5th presidents all died on the 4th of July within 5 years of each other.
I think I might have changed the holiday.
If I was a president, I'd be like staying home and keeping safe. If I've ever been president, no matter if it was ASB or your volunteer, don't be president and don't go out on July 4th,
Ben,
ladies and gentlemen.
how about the opposite? You say 3 of them were died on it. Anybody born? Any of our presidents born on 4th of July?
Just one of the most unnotable and unrecognized and unappreciated presidents of our time, Mr. Calvin Coolidge. He was born on July 4th, 1872. Now, some more useful facts for you guys. For those of you in the United States, you should know that the National Retail Federation expects annually that Americans would spend $6.7 billion on tasty treats, snacks, barbecues. What else do we have? Corn on the cob, watermelon, potato salad, fruit salad, all that kind of snacks, an average of $73 per person.
What are you going to be cooking for 4th of July, Ben?
That seems astronomical to me. Like, what? $73 a person? What are people eating? That's insane.
It's not that what they're eating. I think it's how much they're eating, Bob. You go to these 4th of July barbecues and you know it. Everyone's having their 3rd, 4th, 5th dog, burger, whatever it is.
Mine are like that. I could eat 5 hot dogs for a lot less than $73 a person.
Why do we eat so much on 4th of July, ladies and gentlemen? It's because, according to the Beer Institute, more beer is sold on and around the 4th of July holiday than any other time throughout the year. Generally, Americans will spend around $1 billion on beer for their 4th of July celebrations.
Wow.
And for those of you that prefer a more mature adult beverage, $560 million on wine.
I'm just doing some quick math there, by the way, though. So you're spending $73 a person on food, but you're only spending $20 a person on booze. Like, we got a really good deal on booze, and we are getting ripped off in the food department here.
We still haven't told me what you're grilling, though, because I haven't decided where I'm going to go for 4th of July.
$73. He's got steak and lobster. Like,
you guys are always welcome at my place. It's pretty uneventful. I will probably have crab, and it's the one time a year where you can say that and still be happy about it. Let's carry on, ladies and gentlemen, into the topic of the day, which is freedom. The definition of freedom, technically, Chad, means
Sure, it's the power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint.
yes.
That's the dictionary definition of it.
Many people would say, freedom is just the right to be who we are, to live the life that we want to live. And we talk about freedom a lot, especially in the Win, Make, Give Wealth series for those of you that have taken part of that.
Yeah, your
and if
definition.
you haven't, insert commercial, winmakegive.com/wealth to complete your free wealth series.
Well done, Ben. Well done.
Back to the definition.
What's your definition of freedom?
The ability to do what I want, when I want, with who I want.
Okay.
But that's probably the definition for most reasonable people, is the freedom to do whatever they want, so long as, here's one important thing, it doesn't infringe on another person's freedom, right? The ultimate definition of freedom, if you took it to the nth level, which many maniacs do, basically means that they can do whatever they want no matter who they harm. And that would actually be the definition of anarchy,
Sure.
right? Crime, chaos, that sort of thing. So that's not what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about the freedoms. Now, back in World War II, we had a president, very interesting president, very possibly known as one of the top 5 greatest presidents in our country's history. For those of you that are nerds, Mr. FDR, which Franklin D Roosevelt, because there was another Roosevelt president,
Teddy
Roosevelt, exactly. FDR was president from what years?
That's an interesting one because you can't just count like you think you can now, because Ben, one of the interesting things about him was that he wasn't president for only 8 years like a president is nowadays.
Yeah, he was president for not 1 term, not 2 terms, not 3 terms, but 4 terms. He was actually the only president in U.S. history to serve more than 2 terms.
1933 to 1945, by the way.
He died in his 4th term, newly into the 4th term.
Nearly into the 4th term.
Yeah.
Yeah. Prior, George Washington just kind of made the decision that no president should serve more than 2 terms. So it was kind of an understanding that they wouldn't go on and serve more than that.
An unwritten rule.
Yeah, an unwritten rule. It wasn't actually until FDR passed away towards the end of his presidency after he passed away, that they actually made it a part of the Constitution.
22nd Amendment, which it took them 6 years. In 1951, they would finally enact the 26th or the 22nd Amendment 6 years after Roosevelt's death.
Yeah. Interesting individual, and we're going to talk about why we're talking about him in a second. But I want to bring up one other thing. He's also one of the few individuals, thank goodness, that ever saw Winston Churchill naked. In fact, there is a story of Winston Churchill while visiting the President of the United States in the United States, stepping out naked in front of the president and saying, "You see, Mr. President, I have nothing to hide." Now, there's been stories on and off about is that a true account or not. There was Secret Service guards or whatever that kind of agreed to that. And there was also a message that King George had reported that Winston said to him, which was, "Sir, I believe I'm the only man in the world to have received the head of a nation naked." FDR was also confined to a wheelchair because of...
Well, it was polio, but it was amazing. I know you guys want to blame Canada. We were talking about that before because he was actually in Canada when it happened. The thing I think is amazing about that we were talking about is in today's day and age, you can't even fathom the thought that they actually kept this concealed from the public, that he was in a wheelchair. I mean, the pictures of him are in a car with the door open or sitting at his desk, so nobody's realizing that he's not standing. And when we were looking this up, they say that Secret Service agents actually ripped film out of cameras from reporters who attempted to get pictures of him in his wheelchair. Could you imagine today a president in a wheelchair and nobody actually knowing that was what was going on.
Hiding anything at any point from anybody in today's world just doesn't happen. But FDR is very famous for a lot of things, leading us through World War II, putting a lot of major changes into our government, including some of the social services that we have today.
Yep.
Yeah. And the speech that I know him best for is a speech called The Four Freedoms. And ladies and gentlemen, as you listen to our podcast, it's always Chad, Bob, and Ben, but the man, the myth, the legend you don't hear is Mr. Dave Weldon, who sits in the background. So Dave, do me a favor and let's just roll the Four Freedoms speech from FDR.
The first is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want, which translated into world terms means economic understandings which will secure to every nation a healthy, peacetime life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. The fourth is freedom from fear, which translated into world terms means a worldwide reduction of armaments to such a point and in such a thorough fashion that no nation will be in a position to commit an act of physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world. This nation has placed its destiny in the hands and heads and hearts of its millions of free men and women, and its faith in freedom under the guidance of God. Freedom means the supremacy of human rights everywhere. Our support goes to those who struggle to gain those rights and keep them. Our strength is our unity of purpose to that high concept. There can be no end save victory.
I hope you took a second to really listen to what FDR said. If you tuned out, you're on a jog, right? You're going potty, you're doing something that you're distracted. Let's just revisit them in our voices. The first freedom that FDR said was the freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. Everywhere in the world.
That message keeps coming up everywhere in the world.
Yeah. The second is the freedom of every person to worship God in their own way.
Everywhere in the world.
Everywhere in the world. Third is the freedom from want, which translated into today's terms means economic understandings which will secure to every nation a healthy peacetime life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. And the fourth freedom is a freedom from fear, which translated today, his comment was that there should be a reduction of armaments to such a point and in such a thorough fashion that no nation will be in a position to commit an act of physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world.
Now, Ben, the backdrop of this speech, he gives this speech in January of 1941. It's his address to Congress, essentially the State of the Union that year. And during this time, the reason he's talking about anywhere in the world is Nazi Germany is essentially taking over Europe. And, in December of 1941, 11 months after this speech, the United States is pulled into World War II on the back of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But obviously Roosevelt saw this coming, and there was a whole, during that time, there was a whole kind of buildup to, are we going to war? Are we going to be involved in this war? And so he really, a year in advance, is kind of sets the framework for what we're going to be fighting for when our young men and women go overseas to actually, fight a war.
Yeah, well said. There's nothing mysterious. This is from Roosevelt's speech. There's nothing mysterious about the foundations of a healthy and strong democracy. The basic things expected by our people of their political and economic systems are simple. They are equality of opportunity for youth and others. That's a good thing. Number 2, jobs for those who can work. That is also a good thing. Security for those who need it. Everybody should feel secure and safe. Number 4, the ending of special privilege for the few. The unfair opportunities distributed across the world, so to speak. The preservation of civil liberties for all. Once again, a good thing. And the enjoyment of the fruits of scientific progress and a wider and constantly rising standard of living. What I find interesting about FDR and his lessons, in many ways, we still haven't learned them today.
I was just thinking the same thing as you're saying.
These are, if we look around the world today, these are like
these are the issues.
The undercurrent of,
I might just put this on replay and let the world and the media and everybody listen, and let's go back to some of the things that FDR said. Now, to make this more relevant to each one of you, I want to talk about 2 things. Number 1, I want to talk about these things that I call the 4 thieves of freedom. These are things that steal from your personal freedom, Bob. These are things that can affect, Chad, your ability to have your best life. And it's something that we should pay attention to. Number 1, the inefficient use of resources. A major theft from your happiness, from your life, from your potential, and from your goals is the inefficient use of resources. And the 3 resources that I worry about the most for all of you is your inefficient use of time and mine. I'm not innocent from this either. Our inefficient use of energy. Have you guys ever got home at the end of the day and had no energy left, and you realized that you used it on a bunch of jerk faces that didn't deserve it, and you wish you still had energy at home, right? For people that actually matter to you. And lastly, the inefficient use of wealth and money is that we create our own financial pressures, which is why we created the Wealth Series and the upcoming investing series. Insert commercial, whenmaygive.com/investing if you want to take our free, no obligation, no ads, no promotion, just our gift to you. Yeah, just our gift to you, right? The financial pressures that we cause ourselves because of our inefficient use of money can be solved with 2 things: acquiring income-producing assets so that we shall make money when we have no time to spend or when we do not want to spend time. And number 2, saving as much as we can to prepare for hard times and times that we choose to say, screw it, I am free and I choose not to. Not to what? Doesn't matter. We're just choosing not to.
So Ben, let's go back. You said the first one, inefficient use of resources. You said the first one was time. So give me an example recently that comes to your mind of an inefficient use of time for you.
Well, I think because I live this life, Chad, I can think of a million examples of me spending time helping somebody who doesn't want to be helped. Me spending time holding somebody accountable who's an unaccountable individual, right? Or me spending time doing stuff because it was more fun than what was most important for me to get done that day, right? Me choosing the easy path instead of the hard path. We all use time inefficiently because we don't understand that every yes we give has a corresponding no. If you say yes to somebody at work, you're saying no to somebody at home. You say yes to one employee, you're saying no to a different employee. We have a finite amount of resources. Chad, energy is the same way, right? If you use up all your energy, you don't have any left. We all have a fixed amount. You might have more than me, but each one of us has our own fixed amount. We call these all finite resources. We also have a finite amount of money, right? A certain amount of money that we have in our bank account today that we can save, invest, spend. There's a fixed amount.
The nice thing is, though, we can make more money using some of the methods we taught in the Wealth series and other things like you mentioned, having getting income producing, items and things like that, assets. We can create more money. You can't create more time and you can't create more energy. You've got 24 hours in a day, just like I do. And you said maybe you have more energy or I have more energy just naturally, but we're not going to make that energy bar get any longer than it already is for ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay.
The next major thief of our freedom is a denial of our current situation, a denial of our current state of health, a denial of our current state of debt, a denial of our current state of our business. The fact that we don't take time to have, as we would call it, Chad, a reality check, steals from us because it continues to be a problem time and time and time again. The denial of our current relationships, right? There's so many things, but the lack of a reality check becomes a major thief of your freedom because you continue to think about these situations, allow it to weigh you down and bother you and hold you back.
So basically, what are you sticking your head in the sand about? I mean, I did this so many times. I thankfully have friends like you and my wife and people that have been in my life and others that I just didn't want to look at something and they'd drag you and make you stare at it, So there's always something we're probably sticking our head in the sand about. And you're saying that that's obviously one of the things taking from our freedom because we're not wanting to face what we need to.
Sometimes, like the Americans needed the French to come over and help us fight the British, right? So that we got to this state of freedom. You need somebody like my wife. I think you just said the same thing. Like I had horrible credit when I met my wife. I had made a ton of money in my life. I had horrible credit and I did just have my head in the sand about it. And she was that, that resource, I guess you'd call her in the most kind of,
that accountability partner.
She was that, yeah. She was that person that said like, come on, like you can do this. Like she didn't even necessarily help me with the steps to do it. She was just the person that said, hey, this is your situation. Like, we got to buy a house. What are we doing here?
I get you. My wife wouldn't marry me until I cleaned up some financial. She put that in front of me and held that mirror up. Or our health, when a doctor looks at us and says, look, you're changing the way you eat. Otherwise, you're going to have the heart attack.
The third thief of our freedom is once we understand where we're at or where a relationship is at or where our financings are at or where our business is at, what do you do about it? The third thief of freedom is avoiding conflict and avoiding swift resolution. The leader's job in an organization is to resolve conflict quickly and efficiently so it doesn't fester and turn into something unresolvable. Same thing with relationships, right? Every time you go to bed mad at somebody, you are making a decision to harm that relationship. Because if you knew that you were going to stay in that relationship forever, before you went to bed, you would say, I'm either staying in the relationship, working on staying in the relationship, or I'm working on not being in the relationship. What are my actions doing today? Well, if you cared about the relationship, you would do your best to try to resolve things, maybe not that night, but by the next morning quickly. That is your job. Because when you don't resolve things, doesn't it continue to steal from your mind, your thoughts?
This is counterintuitive, right? I think I like to be comfortable. Like I want to avoid suffering or making somebody else feel bad or making myself feel bad. I'm really bad at this. Like conflict is not my thing. But it just prolongs that bad relationship or that little bit of festering that turns into a big infection in a relationship or something like that.
This is why we talk about forgiveness so much in this series, because we talk about health, wealth, leadership, and legacy, right? And leadership, right, requires you to be living at your best potential. And you can't be at your best potential if you have these other things weighing you down. And some relationships can't be solved but you can stop thinking about it. And the only way to stop thinking about it is when you go back to that person and say, Bob, I know that whatever happened to us in the past, let's let bygones be bygones. I know I have some blame in that, and I just want to apologize and let you to know that it's okay that you have different opinions than me and that we don't always agree on things and that the way I respond to your opinions can be hurtful at times, and I just want to apologize to you, and I want you to know that I also forgive you for your opinions, even though they are not right.
You might be listening to this wherever you are and wondering why we're giggling at the same time as you're hearing this.
Dave's got the audio, I bet.
There was a conversation before we went to recording that we will not bring back up at the moment.
We love each other. We don't always agree, right?
Ben and Bob were not
family.
agreeing
We're
upon.
family.
So, Ben, let's get back to this. Number one was an inefficient use of those resources. Then you talked about denying our current situation. You've just talked about avoiding conflict and a swift resolution. What's that fourth piece?
Wait, before you go on to the fourth piece, Ben, can you? I want. There's something in this third piece that I want you to talk about because I don't know that you're good at this, but I feel like you have figured this out in your career, and it's this idea of like welcoming suffering, right? Obviously, you're like this guy. You like to go get in the mountains and kind of get back to the primal experience, right? And you go hike these long, crazy hikes, and you do it up in the snow and there's a certain amount of suffering in that, but like just talk about the idea of suffering as kind of this tool that you use to deal with conflict, to help you kind of get resolution and really to just kind of sidestep fear.
Well, we have to understand that the struggles and the suffering, the grief, the sadness, those feelings of being alone, all of those items, those are not us. Those are just merely those things. And we've talked in the past about riding the wave and just allowing that to be a part of the journey. I think about all the struggles and bad things that's happened in my life, many of which I caused and were my fault. I'm very aware of the contributions to my problems in my life that I've done. They also made me who I am today. Right? And every employee and relationship and friend and family member that has me today has a better version of me because of the suffering and the struggles, right? And I think you all can relate to that as well. You are the version of you today because of the mistakes, successes, and lessons that you learned on the journey. Number four, and it kind of goes back to everything that we've been talking about, the fourth thief of our freedom, our personal freedom, is being surrounded by, affected by, influenced by, held down by, held back by, pooped on by, let the list go on and on and on by
the wrong people.
The wrong people. Thank you, Bob. Nobody is successful with the wrong people around them. There's no sports team, right? There's no government, there's no company that succeeds with the wrong board of directors, board of advisors, cabinet members, which, speaking of which, FDR was the first president to do what in his cabinet?
Install a woman in his cabinet.
First one.
The director of labor, his secretary of labor was a woman.
Was a female, yeah, interesting. Anyway, back to surrounded by the wrong people. People can either be sails, S-A-I-L, Chad, or anchors.
Oh, yes.
What does a sail do?
Oh, a sail is going to make you go faster, fill with wind, and just push you along your journey.
It's going to push you in the direction that you choose, right? And then what does an anchor do?
Stops you.
Stops you. It holds you back.
Oh, yeah.
It slows you down, right? I want you to sit back and ask yourself, what is stealing my freedom today? Is it my personal effects on myself because I don't use time or energy or money right? Is it because I'm literally in denial of the situation that I'm in? Is it that I know my problems and I know the situation that I'm in, but I don't do anything about it? We were talking earlier, that constant student, that person, that attendee, but they're not actually on the journey, right? They're not doing anything to resolve their problems or to resolve conflict, or we're just surrounded by the wrong people. We have a bunch of anchors around us. Just take a moment and think about that. What is currently stealing from your freedom? Insert awkward silence for you to think now.
We need like Jeopardy music there or something. I don't know.
Bob, you ruined the awkward silence.
Oh, sorry.
So just for that, Bob, I'm going to ask you, which one of the four are you having the biggest issue with? Which thief is hitting you the hardest?
I mean, 1 and 3, probably inefficient use of resources. I probably don't spend my time as efficiently as I should. And then I do not like conflict. I will push conflict off until it becomes this thing that you have to finally deal with, at which point it's 10 times what it ever would have been had you just dealt with it in the beginning. Those are my 2.
What about you, Chad?
Well, I at first was going to say surrounded by the wrong people as I found myself in the room with you guys.
Yeah.
Ouch.
You know, as we used an inefficient use
We
of our
feel the
time.
same way.
As we had an
feel the
inefficient use of time earlier today. To me, it's definitely going to be the inefficient use of my resources. It's going to be on me. I mean, I've learned the lesson that if someone will hold the mirror up in front of me, I don't have to worry about that thief anymore. I might deny, but it's a very short period of time, and I got no problem with conflict. So that one I've handled, and I've had those wrong people in my life to learn the lesson, the sail and the anchor. So to me, it's definitely the inefficient use of time. I might find myself sitting around doing something that I know I could be doing anything else more productive with regularly.
What do we do about it? As we're jumping into this, we're thinking a lot about freedom today. We're celebrating our respective countries' Independence Day if it's coming up, right? We've thought about all of these messages and the thieves of our freedom, the 4 thieves. So what do you do about it? I hate to have a conversation that just drags us down and doesn't lift us back up with a plan.
Well, let's have a plan.
Every great podcast comes with a plan, ladies and
Yes.
gentlemen. So the freedom in you. Number 1, what do? You change your thoughts and your self-talk. You have to understand that your lack of freedom in many ways is being created by the stories you tell yourself. You aren't good enough. You aren't doing good enough. You should be doing better, right? You need to have somebody else in your life to be happy. It's almost too late for me to have kids. I feel guilty for not spending time with somebody. I should have more money. I should be further along. These are all thieves of our freedom, and it's only going to be solved if you have a reality check about your own internal conversation. So step 1, I want you to change your thoughts, and you'll enjoy an upcoming episode when we talk about reframing your thoughts so that you limit that self-talk and the impact of it on you. Number 2, we need to make room in our lives by removing things, stopping, avoiding stuff. Imagine that your life is a glass of water. In order for you to have fresh new water in your glass, you have to pour some out. We need to make time in our lives and our calendars for opportunity to happen. And one of the ways you do that is you give up things. You give up appointments that are eating up your time and energy. You give up relationships that aren't mutual or aren't helping you get to where you want to go. You give up projects or businesses or divisions or things, right? Maybe you give up jobs, but you also give up feelings. Some of the feelings that you need to give up is your desire for things to be stable and for things to be comfortable. Comfort is the recipe for average. You don't want to be average. If comfort is the recipe for average, what you'll know is in order to be above average, you have to be
Uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable is the secret of being above average, which means you have to give up your desire for being comfortable all the time. We have to give up the relationships, these people that are holding us back, right? We have to give up our fears around success or money. We got to give up the things in our lives that are wasting time. Maybe it's the Netflix or the video games.
The endless scrolling on Facebook.
Oh, yes.
Yes, all of those things that eats up hours and hours and hours. We got to give up our desire to have things now that we can't afford because it creates debt. Debt is a thief of freedom, right? So what can you do to eliminate that? And we got to give up our desire to be right all the time. That desire to be right, to sound smart, look good, right? That is holding you back. And then lastly, you got to have a process for turning things around. I'm going to propose a model that I use called problem button plan. So let's walk through these 3 words quickly, and then maybe we'll do a future episode on this aspect. But problem button plan is a 3-step process that I go through to change something in somebody else's life. If I was coaching Chad, or if I was trying to help myself, I would want to first identify the problem. I call it the real problem. And it takes some real thinking. Like the problem in your mind might be, I don't have any money. That's not the real problem. The real problem is you spend all the money that you make. That's the real problem.
So it's getting to the root of the problem.
The real underlying problem, right? And you have to be clear and identify it and write it out. And it has to be something that's solvable, something that you can change, Chad. So you have to say, can I change my spending habits? If yes, then my real problem is that I spend as much as I make, or I spend more than I make if I'm using debt, right? Now, the next word that I used, Bob, was button. Think about like a buzzer, like Jeopardy, right? You're hitting the button. A button triggers you like a bomb, right? Boom.
Okay.
A button is something that's going to get you to take action on something that you know that you should have taken, but you just haven't done it before. What would an example of that be? How many people don't lose weight until they get in a breakup or a divorce? How many people don't quit smoking until they get pregnant? How many people, and you go through all these different examples, and what it took, it wasn't the knowledge that they needed to change something. It was that they needed a purpose or a button that would get them to do something that they weren't normally willing to do.
In our case, Chad, that was finding a great gal that wouldn't marry us unless we got our credit in order.
that was definitely part of it, sure.
That was the button, right?
Yep,
I
absolutely.
have to do this if I want this relationship to work. Makes sense.
Yep.
And then the last step of this is plan. What are you going to do to solve that particular problem? You know, the saving things, we gave you a lot of ideas in previous episodes and in the Wealth series. But think about whatever your issue is right now, whatever's causing you to have a lack of freedom, take a single piece of paper and start writing what's the real problem. If you don't change it, what's going to happen to you? That's your button. If you do change it, what will happen to you? That's also a positive button. And then the rest of the page, you use it to write out a plan. What are you going to do to start making small changes to get your freedom back?
And that's the key, I think. It's those small changes.
Changes.
It's not a big leap. It's small.
We all want the ability to be free. We want to live in a world that's free, in a world that has the freedoms, and we want to feel like things are going to get better. I hope our dive into freedom today got you thinking, got you laughing, and got you excited about changing one thing that was stealing from your freedom. How do we end our calls?
Well, you know, here at Win, Make, Give, Ben, we always talk about health, wealth, leadership, legacy, and today we also talked about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness through freedom. And we hope that you are free to remember to join us on all of our future episodes by subscribing so they come right to you. Make sure you don't forget to give us a rating and a review if you haven't. Join our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/WinMakeGive. And until our next time, have a safe, happy Independence Day. Wash those hands. And as always, do good.